Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second annual Write Chicago Words in Power. This is UIC Law Writing Resource Center's National Day on Writing event. I am Shakira Pleasant, the director of the Writing Resource Center, and it is my pleasure to kick off this event this year. So before I introduce Professor Kim Ricardo, I just want to note a couple of things. Number one, the conversation that we're about to have by our expert panelists will explore writing and the impact that it can have on all of us. And I want us to think about the name of this event, Write Chicago, because if we think about where UIC Law is positioned in downtown Chicago and the writers that are with us today, as well as writers that have gone before us, consider how have they impacted our life, including people like Leslie Honoré, Sandra Cisneros, Gwendolyn Brooks, Loy Webb, Justice David Ellis, and even Ernest Hemingway. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Professor Kim Ricardo, who is the director of the Lawyering Skills Program at UIC Law. Professor Ricardo, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Ricardo, and I teach here at UIC Law, and I also direct the Lawyering Skills, or LS program. Every student who graduates from this law school takes at least 4 LS classes. In these classes, they learn how to read and analyze cases, and how to do legal research, and most importantly, how to write for a legal audience. We're very proud of the strong emphasis that this law school places on writing. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Writing Resource Center's event today to celebrate the National Day on Writing. This year's theme is Write Chicago, Words and Power. And we have a really wonderful group of speakers, each of them professional writers, and one of whom is a former student of mine. They're going to speak to you today about how they use storytelling in their advocacy for social change and community empowerment. As Professor Pleasant already shared with us, Chicago is, of course, home to many famed writers, and our surroundings invite us to celebrate that fact every day. If you happen to be on campus, you can look out a window facing south and see the beautiful bronze sculptures atop the pediment of the Harold Washington Library. In our backyard, the cement seating areas in Pritzker Park are adorned with the words and names of local writers, like Richard Wright and Sandra Cisneros. Cisneros' quote reads, "You can never have enough sky. Go Chicago sky." Wright's quote is a little longer, and it comes from his memoir, Black Boy. In it, he writes, quote, "I had once tried to write, had once reveled in feeling, had let my crude imagination roam, but the impulse to dream had slowly been beaten out of me by experience. Now it surged up again, and I hungered for books, new ways of looking and seeing." The way Wright describes having his impulse to dream slowly beaten out of him, unfortunately reminds me of my experience as a first-year law student. As an English major, I had devoured books, plays, essays, and other texts during my undergrad. But when I got to law school, all they let me read was cases. 60 and 70 and 80 pages of cases every night, and I kind of hated it. My professors were using those cases to try to teach me what the law was, and I almost forgot that I was in school to try to learn what the law could be. So if you're a law student and listening to me say this and it resonates with you, let's just pause here because I need to tell you something important. Don't let law school suck your imagination dry. Learning the law can be incredibly frustrating because there are so many cases in which the outcomes simply do not seem fair. But if you allow yourself to think, well, I guess that's what the law is, you won't let yourself imagine what the law could be. And you might not dare yourself to work towards the justice that you can envision with your imagination. In a speech she made in 1964 to a group of writers, Chicago writer Lorraine Hansberry said something that I think is equally important for novice lawyers to hear. She told them, "Write if you will, but write about the world as it is and as you think it ought to be and must be. If there is to be a world, write about all the things that men have written about since the beginning of writing and talking, but write to a point. Work hard at it and care about it." And I think these are great words to leave you with as we start this today's We Write Chicago.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Ricardo, for your welcome and remarks. I'm Danielle McCain, the Associate Director of the Writing Resource Center and the moderator for this dynamic panel of writing experts today. I hope you are looking forward to celebrating National Day on Writing with us the same way that I am, and this conversation that has become an annual event. I sure am really excited about this panel. We will have time later for Q&A, so put your questions in the chat and our WRC team will gather them for the Q&A session. Please remain on mute. That is my only housekeeping item at this point. So let's move right ahead and meet our panelists. One of the campaigns for National Day on Writing is #WhyIWrite. So for each panelist, please introduce yourself and tell us why you write. We'll start with Jeanette.
Hi, greetings everyone, and a special hello to Professor Kim. Shout out to my crim law professor. I am a proud graduate of UIC Law, and I started writing like 15 years ago, and I published a young adult fiction series because at the time I didn't see a voice that I thought needed to be there for middle school and high school girls of color. So I set out to be the change that I wanted to see.
Okay, Professor Mundy, how about you? Why do you write?
Hi, everyone, and first of all, thanks so much for having me here today. As a law teacher, I write for a couple of reasons. The first is because it was something I couldn't do as a practitioner, and writing really allows me to explore different areas, especially in the context of areas of systemic injustice that I can kind of research and write and develop more fully as a teacher. And it's really an incredible privilege and luxury and very enjoyable. So that's the first reason. The second reason is because it helps me have some empathy with my students. My students have a rather rigorous writing assignment due next week, and I feel for them, right? Like, writing is not easy to do. It is a demanding pursuit. It requires discipline, it requires investment, it requires motivation, and a good deal of humility too. And so I also write so I can feel somewhat more connected to the students who I'm working with. So those are my two main reasons. So thanks.
GLENANCE, how about you? Introduce yourself and tell us why you write.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm GLENANCE Green. I write for healing and liberation. I started my journey to writing well before I had a career or even knew what a career was. As a young person, I grew up in a loving household, but also I'm an 80s baby and a child grew up in the 90s, and in the time where in my household, at least, it was the idea of children should be seen and not heard. And so I didn't feel like I had a lot of spaces where I could just kind of speak my mind and have my own voice to tell my own story. And I had a lot of fire inside of me. And just if nobody could hear it, the pages could, the universe would. And so I started my journey to writing actually pretty early on, getting free in a household where I didn't always feel like there was room. And part of it was just the people around me didn't quite know what to do with all of the energy that was there residing with them. And so as I got older, I used that because I realized that was something that actually really helped me as a tool for equity and change in community. So a lot of the work that I do around writing now, whether it's on the research side, because I'm a researcher and a scholar and intellectual, or on the creative side, using various art forms as tools of healing and liberation through filmmaking and performance art and storytelling and playwriting, it's all weaved through the same thread of how do we have more equitable practices and how do we use what we have, our tools, to get free.
Okay. Last but not least, Michael, tell us, give us an introduction on yourself, as well as tell us why you write.
Sure. Thanks, Danielle, and great seeing everyone. Great hearing from everyone. My name is Michael Wilder. I sit on the global board of directors for my law firm, which is a global labor and employment law firm called Littler Mendelson. I'm also a partner at the firm and the chairman and co-founder of the Black Men Lawyers Association. And outside of all of that and many other hats, I'm a published author as well. First off, as a lawyer, I write to pay the mortgage, right? I write to survive as a lawyer. The other reasons that I write is just because I love it. It allows me to tap a creative side outside of the typical way that I write at being a lawyer. And that's why I started publishing books. My first book was a roadmap / self-help book for teenagers and young adults called The Playbook for a $1 and a Dream. And I wrote that one to inspire young adults and to give them direction. I have a romantic comedy coming out Valentine's Day of next year. I wrote that just to make people laugh and to fall in love. And then I have a religious piece that comes out Good Friday of next year in April, and that's just to inspire people to get back to church. I feel like there's been a big disconnect with COVID and the inability to physically step foot in church for quite a long time. So that's why I do it.
All right, so let's start off. GLENANCE, you actually began your conversation, this conversation, with discussing your early experiences with writing, and that being writing in your home, just trying to get your voice out, and that being an opportunity to do that. What were your other earlier experiences? And then I'm going to kick that to all of the panelists to tell us about what were your first experiences with writing. I know mine was being introduced to poetry through a teacher who taught us how to write poetry and introduced me to greats like Gwendolyn Brooks. So GLENANCE, tell us a little bit more about that, and then I'll kick it to the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, and I realized I'll just back up and realize that I failed part of the assignment in introducing myself in terms of who I was. So I'll start there. So yeah, I am the co-founder and executive director of the Black Researchers Collective. I am a writer, researcher, and filmmaker who uses storytelling, as tools to get free. Yeah, I'm also a scholar, so I am wrapping up a dissertation in policy, ed policy at UIC, and so that's my UIC connection. Woo-hoo-hoo. So that's just a little bit about me and my background. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is really connecting research to policy to practice, and writing is a mechanism through doing that as well. My earlier experience actually started with poetry as well and spoken word. So it's not just like writing, but also being able to perform and writing for different contests, showing up at different open mics. So part of my earlier experiences is really around performance and connecting with other folks in spaces who are also writing about their struggles and their experiences of being able to get free collectively as well. So I would say that was some of my earliest work. And then actually recognizing early on in school that I had a talent and a knack of being able to build out characters and get a point across more succinctly than what I was able to articulate. I always felt like I could never really say all the right things, or when I said something, I was always getting it wrong or messing up. But when I put things on paper, it made sense, right? So sometimes I was just like, I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to go ahead and write this, and then I'm going to go ahead and leave this note in my drawer for somebody to pick it up and read it, And so I would say that those are some of my earlier experiences. And I thought that I was a good writer for a long time until I got to grad school and realized that I could be a much stronger writer. So it was actually through the academy that made my writing in other areas much stronger, because I ended up getting some professors who drilled down on me much more and like, hey, you got really great ideas, but here's a better way to move your argument much further. Here's a better way to take what you're much interested in and take what you're interested in and amplifying it on a greater level. So it was actually through formal education that I was able to hone my craft much more intentionally and deliberately.
Okay. How about you, Hugh? What were your earliest experiences with writing?
So yeah, GLENANCE's comments really resonate with me. So my mother was an elementary school reading teacher, and I may be dating myself a bit, but back in the 80s, we were all hooked on phonics. That was a very important part of our sort of development as readers and writers, and also things that were very formulaic, like sentence diagramming. And then, like Professor Ricardo, I was an English major and became much more interested in creative writing as I went through college. And this has become, kind of my struggle as my legal writing students can attest. How do we blend the kind of formal, even formulaic approaches that legal writing requires with opportunities for creativity, right? How do we use the skills that we're learning in law school, which are very rigid, as you know, in terms of writing, but still have room for interpretation, creativity, and a kind of self-expression. And as Professor Ricardo was saying, how do we think about becoming agents of change when we have to still be kind of steeped in what feels like a very formulaic kind of endeavor? So yeah, thanks.
Jeanette, what was your earliest experience with writing? And then Michael after Jeanette. I think she's frozen. So actually, Michael, how about? Oh, okay. You're back.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm in the back of a car heading to the airport. So for me, I was raised in the library. The library was one of my favorite places. I still love libraries to this day. So I was the kid who in school, over the summers, my mother used to make us, I was one of 4 kids, and we would go to the library once a week because that was free. And so we could check out as many books as allowed. And I always checked out the maximum and would read them before I had to return them. And so I just developed this love of reading. And then I had an aunt who was my grandmother's sister, who lived in Baton Rouge with my history, with my grandfather's only sister. And so I relished getting letters from her. And she was a math teacher, but also an English mistress. And so she would sometimes send back my letters with little corrections and things, which I just thought was great, right? So like others, I've always just liked writing. When I was in high school, I won an NAACP AXO writing competition. It was something that came very easily to me, my humanities courses, et cetera. Obviously in law school, they have to retrain your brain from creative writing to legal writing, which I enjoyed as well, and was honored to serve as a teaching assistant for Professor Mike Myers for one of his LS1 classes. So just always, I read all the time. I usually finish at least a book a week, or I did when I had more time to read. And I think when you are an avid reader, writing is just easier because your vocabulary expands and you just kind of learn others' cadences and rhythms and writing. I think it makes you a better writer to be a voracious reader.
So Michael, tell us about your early experiences, and then I want to transition a little bit to what your day-to-day writing looks like.
Yeah, sure. So for me, kind of like GLENANCE, mine started with poetry and spoken word in college. Some of it was about love, some of it was about women, romantic relationships, some of it was about, I was in the honors college at Michigan State University, and there were only 3 African-American students out of 300. And so I talked about the isolation aspect that had on me coming from Detroit public school system, where we were like, everyone was African-American, right? So it started with those spoken word and poetry nights. And then in college, within that same first semester, I remember I had wrote a paper for a professor, and I thought it was beautiful. You know, I thought it was really good. Thought it was real well written. And he gave it back to me and showed me that it was not well written. It told me I didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to formulate sentences, which was not a shocker because I didn't take high school like English that seriously. Right? I was an art major in high school, but I decided to go to honors liberal arts college. So when I'm in, once I had that conversation about my first paper in honors college, he took me to the side and actually tutored me for the entire semester. So I went from basically an F on my first paper to an A in the class. And so I took that as a challenge. And that really inspired me to really hone in on my writing skills. But then I got to law school, first year, legal writing 1, and I wrote my first paper and it went really well. It was a good A minus, you know, so better start. And then my second paper was a C minus. And the professor was like, yeah, I think your ego got you off to the first paper. So let me help you work on the second paper so you can become a better legal writer. And he tutored me throughout the first semester of law school with legal writing. And it got better and better. And actually, I didn't get an A out of that one. I think I got a B plus. But what's funny is fast forward probably like 10 years later, I then became an adjunct law professor teaching advanced legal writing 4 at the same law school at Chicago, Kent. You know, so that just kind of tells you how things can turn around when you really love something, you enjoy it, and you know, if you're not where you need to be, you can continue to work on it. Because for me, every single day you can become a better and better writer. That's just personally how I feel.
All right, and Michael, will you tell us a little bit about, you touched on each day you can become a better writer.
Yep.
In your professional capacity, what do you do daily in terms of writing?
Emails. So, you know, in my capacity now, I'm a senior partner at my firm. And the vast majority of my day is a lot of email communications. You know, it's either with my clients on a daily basis, it's my associates that I'm working with, my partners, my subject matter experts within my firm that need to help me with my particular clients. A lot of emails. Second to that, I would say I'm a glorified proofreader. So I create the strategy for cases, I create the strategy for the documents themselves and for the motions, the summary judgments, the appellate briefs, and I kind of give outlines and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, someone else is writing the actual work product for me to review, whether it's a brief, a motion, or just a correspondence. And then I'm reviewing it and track changing it and adding comments and then reviewing it again. So I think the vast majority from a lawyer perspective is the emails and the proofreading of certain documents. Outside of that, I am, you know, I finalized my second book and I'm about to finalize my third book. And so I'm doing a lot of writing and getting reality checks from my agents and proofwriters when they come back saying I need to work on certain chapters.
So fun fact about emails, one study showed that the average office worker writes the length of a novel every year. And that's just in emails alone. So I'm sure across the board, there's, you know, so much time spent on emails. GLENANCE, tell us about your daily.
Yeah, you know, I really appreciate this question because I want to go back to something that Jeanette said early on, which connects to my earlier inspirations as well. Like I was also a child of the library where my mother would take us all the time. And I think like reading really inspires me along with the world, my experiences in the world, but reading really inspires me to get down and like put a couple pieces on the page. And growing up, I was like, you know, really into Toni Morrison, Terry McMillan, Eric Jerome Dickey, Sister Soldier, Omar Tyree, all like Donald Goines, like all of some of like really great like Black writers, many of who we don't even hear or know or talk about, who I just was like really deeply immersed in their work. And I would always take a book with me, and I still do to this day. Like I have a book with me right here everywhere I go, like something to read. And so I think part of my process of connecting, and my mother also was an educator, and so we always had homework. We were always writing even when we didn't write. So I actually preferred that my teachers gave me homework because they didn't, and I said I didn't have homework. My mom would say, okay, well, you have 45 minutes to do X, which included some writing tasks. So that trained me. I just like go back to those earlier experiences. I love my mother for that, like amazing woman. It trained me to be disciplined. So now what I do when I want to move something along, I write for like 3 minutes a day. Now that seems like very minor, in like minuscule, what can you get done in 3 minutes? But it's really about patterns of consistency. So if you're writing 3 minutes a day, no matter what it is, like every single day, like you could write a novel. Like I wrote like my second book writing 3 minutes a day, and then it went to like 5 minutes and then 10 minutes. Next thing I know, I'm writing 30 minutes. I'm like, I got to get out the house and go to work. So I think that's a part, in addition to what Michael was saying in terms of emails and work products, my own personal writing process is being consistent, but writing 3 to 5 minutes of something every day.
Hugh, what does your daily look like?
So it really depends on the time of the year. Although I love the comments, first of all, about proofreading, because that is an underutilized skill set in law school. We're requiring our students to read and write, but proofreading and editing can be such a powerful tool for improving our own writing. And I think that that's often overlooked. In addition, I love the consistency remark from GLENANCE, because when I am writing, which is mainly during the summer, I have to establish a ritual, and sometimes that ritual only involves 50 words. I go by words and not minutes, but you know, it's often just a struggle to produce a sentence. But as long as I'm doing something during the day, it really helps my writing. And so my summers are spent, again, in the demanding and often humbling work of trying to churn out a piece of scholarship. Right now, I'm delighted to be working with students who are writing, and I am primarily collaborating with my students in an effort to help them enjoy writing, which is not always easy, and develop skills in a very new area of writing. Right? Legal writing is such a different kind of writing, and so most of my fall is spent in terms of writing, thinking about writing from a student's perspective, and trying to cultivate both an appreciation of legal writing, but also, as I was saying earlier, thinking about how creativity and self-expression can inform what can otherwise be kind of a formulaic process. And it's probably going to take me, maybe the next 30 years to figure out where that balance lies. So I hope that I can continue working with students for that long, because it's not an easy balance to strike. Thanks.
Hugh, I want to stick with you for a minute on, sure. You know, from the student, you've been both, you know, you've been a public defender, clerk for a judge, and now you're on the other side of teaching students how to write. What for you, what is good writing? What would you say to a student is good writing?
So again, certainly in the first semester, we've got to kind of stick to a familiar formula, because I think that lawyers respond to familiarity. Lawyers like analysis that they easily recognize. Lawyers do not want verses of unrhymed iambic pentameter. That is not what lawyers respond to. So we've got to think about the formula in terms of good writing, but I want my students to think also about how their own kind of creativity can inform legal analysis. And we really do that through thinking about what we call live client cases. So working with an actual pending case involving a client, usually a client that I represent pro se. And so thinking about how we can discover other issues within that formula, like issues involving social justice, issues involving looking through what can be a dense kind of record of facts and identifying which facts are most relevant, developing our cross-cultural awareness in terms of working with a client who might be from a much different socioeconomic background. So those are the kinds of things that I think cultivate good writing. So again, I wish I had the answer. It's incredibly challenging, and I demand a lot from my students, and they respond so well this semester, especially. But good writing, again, means, at least in the legal context, staying within the formula, but thinking about all these other issues that inform what our analysis should look like. Thanks.
Jeanette, same question for you, but I also want you to talk about, particularly being a published author, about the importance of having a process, which is something we emphasize to our students in the Writing Resource Center, those students that come to the center. Tell us a little bit about your process as well as what you consider to be good writing.
Sure. So for me, young adult fiction novels, while raising 3 small kids and having a very full life, because I disciplined myself, as Glenette said, to make sure that I wrote every day. I was more selfish and I made sure I wrote for more than 3 minutes. But I would sometimes wake up in the morning at 5 before my family awakened so that I could get my writing in. And then when my son was school age, I would, carve out hours of the day that were just devoted to writing, barring something unforeseen. And so it was a very, very strict process for me because I wanted to, I wanted to write while the creative juices were flowing. And second, because I had so many other demands on my time, I had to be disciplined if I was going to achieve the goal. And so for, my colleagues who are also creative writers, I think we can all attest that when you have an idea, sometimes I would scribble notes down on napkins or on the back of something and throw it in my bag or purse to remember, the next day how I want to expound upon that. And for me, what makes good writing is the discipline of making sure that it's not perfect writing, but it's grammatically correct. Because I think it was Michael who said, he is an ad hoc editor and I'm a proofreader, and I've always been that, and not intentionally. So like when I read the Chicago Tribune or Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, both of which I read online, and I'm not reading to catch mistakes, but my eye just goes to it. And so I think because I was such a voracious reader, that when I read other people's writing, I catch that. And I often think, well, how did the editor not catch that? I caught that. So for me, what makes good writing is all of the things that Professor Hughes shared in terms of the organization. And as a lawyer, we're trained to write different than we are trained for creative fiction writing. But making sure that whatever I write, and I know we all write a lot of emails, countless emails. Anytime I'm drafting a response to someone, it's like I'm writing a brief. Like I don't pour over it for hours, but I make sure that it's written well so that when they read it, they understand the points, etc. So I'm not the person who's going to shoot off a sloppy email response to someone. It's going to be very thoughtful and very writer.
Okay, GLENANCE, tell us what you consider is good writing, but also one of the things that comes to mind, particularly with you, is that you wear several hats. You're a creative, you're a writer, you're a researcher, artist, filmmaker, community organizer. What do you think in those in considering all the roles that you have, what do you think is good writing? And then the other part of that is, what do you think is universal to all writing?
Yeah, I think that my response to both of those questions are one and the same. And that's really writing that emotes, right? And evokes a particular thing, conveys a point very succinctly and poignantly. I think that is fundamental to all writing, no matter what you're writing, whether it's scholarly, academic, or whether it's creative. What is the point of what you're writing? And you may have a target audience, but if you can't give that to a lay person who's impacted by that, for them to make sense of it, or if your grandmother who maybe has like an 8th grade education, are not able to understand what the thing that you wrote, what is the point? Who are you really writing for, right? And so for me, it's about, what is the connection and how is the narrative of what you're writing weaved together in such a way that makes sense to anybody who could pick up that text. So I would say that's my response to both of those questions. And I agree with everything that Hugh and Jeanette said as well about kind of structure and formulas. Part of the writing that I do, because I'm a nonlinear writer and thinker, is remixing formulas and turning them on their heads. I think, and you have to understand the formula enough to be able to do that. But for me, I think that there is a way to get to a particular point that may draw outside the lines a little bit. So it's not to say that in contradiction to anything, but I think that there's a place for that as well. But if you're able to weave that thread, I think you're on the right track.
Michael, transitioning or moving between litigator and an author, what skills did you learn in law school or in writing in general that you felt were transferable to being an author and publishing?
Yeah, sure. So first, I'll kind of like tell you what I use for each one and kind of how I merge them. When it comes to being a lawyer, I mean, either way, no grammatical errors, right? I mean, I think you start with that. Can't have any grammatical errors. The writing has to be clear and concise. There has to be brevity. I told someone the other day who tends to send me what I call Pelican Brief emails. You know, if you guys saw the movie Pelican Brief with Julia Roberts and Denzel Washington, it's called the Pelican Brief because it's about pelicans, but it was also very, very long. He was sending these Pelican Brief emails. I'm like, dude, you can say that in 2 paragraphs, not 20. And you're billing my client for 20 paragraphs, like cut it out, right? So brevity is important. In the legal field, tackling the actual issues that are in front of you is going to be important. Client thinking, so client interfacing. So you're not just thinking about, oh, the law, oh, the facts. Think about how it impacts this client, because once you file this document in federal court, it's going to become public, right? So how does this impact the client and what they're dealing with, to make sure you're considering that as well. Look at the judge, right? If you can write and you can be aggressive, but how is that judge going to view it once they read it, right? So sometimes you have to kind of like take it back. There's a way to be pointed without being aggressive or evil about what you're saying. And so thinking about it from that legal aspect, I think those are some very important things. I would say from the published author creative side of things, what I would take from all of that is obviously the no grammatic errors, clear and concise is important. But I think what's really important is you have to write something that captures the reader, captures them from the minute they start reading it, and they don't want to put the book down. I write books in a way where you feel like you're in a movie. So when you're writing it, when I'm writing it so that you can actually visualize everything. My fictional books, of course, that you can visualize everything all the way down to the T, and you don't want to let the book go. I've also told myself, if it can't be read within 2.5 hours, then it's too long, right? Because a typical movie, once it's 2 hours and 40 minutes, like you up in 007, you're ready to get out of that movie. That thing takes too long. So 2.5 hours is where I'm trying to like stop it. So if you could sit down without stopping and read, it's going to only take you 2.5 hours. So that's just kind of my philosophy and kind of how I do things. But, and I'll tell you too, we were talking about earlier, kind of like what people do to kind of like write. For me, staring at a white screen on a laptop is scary, right? Without anything or any words written on there. So I actually wrote my entire first and second book on iPhone notes. So I just, whenever I'm sitting down or I'm just doing nothing, I just type any moment I get a chance, until one day my notes disappeared. But luckily I backed it up on Microsoft Word. But so be careful with that part. But there's ways to figure out what works for you so that you can write in a way where you can feel accomplished each time you sit down and do it.
Jeanette, what about you, UIC alum? What skills were transferable for you from law school to publishing and writing books?
Oh, well, the no grammatical errors, brevity, making sure that it flowed, outlining. When I wrote my first novels, I didn't outline, I just kind of free-formed it. And now, with my legal writing training, I find myself kind of outlining, the different things that I want various characters to do. There are about 6 main characters in the 7th book that I'm working on. And so I actually have like a little grid of, I think I want this character to go in this direction. It's going to link with what this character is doing over here. And I did not do that with the first 6 books. And that worked out well for me not doing it, but it was certainly a discipline that I learned in law school, the power of organizing your thoughts in an outline format. And that works for some, it might not work for others, but that's one thing. And then just the, enjoy it, because writing is a very personal thing. And I think we can all attest that, and again, I'm speaking to the creative writing side, if it's not fun and if you're not enjoying writing it, then people aren't going to enjoy reading it. And so one of the biggest compliments I got as a newly published young adult fiction author was someone who didn't even know me sent me an email and said, "You don't understand, my daughter is not really a voracious reader, but she would not put your book down. And then she demanded that I order the second because the books end with cliffhanger endings deliberately to encourage them to buy the next in the series." And so I viewed that as a huge compliment because I was helping someone else develop a love for reading by something that I had written. So for me, I try to make sure it's engaging and it's something that I would want to read.
So each of you in some shape and form have carved out at least some part of your identity through writing. What does your writing say about you and tell us and how does it tell us who you are? And we'll start with Hugh for that one and then move to GLENANCE.
So listening to all of our panelists, I can tell you that I need to get out of my comfort zone. The variety of interesting writing that all of the panelists are engaged in is really fascinating, and it turns out that I might just be bored. I'm not sure. I've really been in one mode of writing, and to the extent that it tells you anything about me, it might tell you that I'm writing lengthy law review articles that only my mother is reading, and very few others. So I need to explore some more creative pursuits. But to the extent that my writing has a kind of imprint, I like using storytelling and narrative as a way to identify a broader legal problem. So most of my legal writing involves an actual case and a narrative involving usually a former client who I felt was treated unjustly as a result in some gap or problem within the legal system. And then my writing discusses from an analytical standpoint how we might address the issue. And that's really been kind of my method for writing. And it helps, again, with this tension that I described earlier about creative writing and more formulaic or analytical kind of writing. And my hope is that the narrative draws the reader in more than just kind of a legal discussion, and that through the narrative, the reader starts to not only understand the legal problem, but maybe even care about the legal problem, or identify that this, that the problem exists and that actual people have suffered as a result in either inequity or gaps in the legal system. And that is precisely what I'm trying to do with my students this semester as well, and gets back to why we actually focus on clients and cases when we think about how the legal system works. So, and again, I'm gonna, after this panel, I'm gonna go write a short story, or at least try to, because that answer is not terribly scintillating.
So Hugh, I know that from my perspective and work with you, you have an imperative around criminal justice issues, correct? Right? So
Yes.
that is part of your identity as a writer.
Yeah.
So don't forget that. Don't underestimate what it is you're doing and the impact of what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. So there, and I could write again for the next 30 years and not even scratch the surface of all of the inequitable pieces of the criminal justice system. So yeah, I appreciate that acknowledgement.
All right, Glennis. So tell us a little bit about your identity, about development around your writing and what it says about you and who you are.
Yeah, I think, and I want to kind of go back to something that was said earlier, and all of these things are converging together in my head. Jeanette, that you were saying about organizing, like, all of those things are, I think that are super helpful. And with me being a nonlinear thinker, like I love outlining. I love setting goals around, like, what is the goal and intention behind a particular thing. That really helps kind of advance my writing. And with that, I think when people read my writing, it tells people that I'm present, that I understand a thing, that I get it, that I know what's going on. And that's something that's really important to me, for somebody to be, if I'm writing about a particular thing that's, impacting somebody, that they're able to read it and say, wow, yes, she gets it. She knows, like, I'm sitting in solidarity with this person. And that's something that's super important to me. And so I think that that's kind of the biggest thing. But as I feel like, Hugh, I want to come back to what you said, because I know it felt like what you said wasn't particularly scintillating, but I've struggled with this in my writing for years, of voice, and when to, especially when I'm writing academically, how much of myself to put forward, especially as a researcher, and how I was trained as a researcher. Very much like, be objective, be non-biased, like, put distance between yourself and your work. And so even in my work today, and I'll use it like a personal example of my dissertation proposal, my committee chair, when she read it, she was like, okay, there are these two voices that sit, like, there's this highly academic voice here. And and I'm like, yes, that was very deliberate. And she's like, yeah, kick that to the curb. You don't really need that. Like, this other piece right here that you have is really the direction that you're going, based on what you shared with me, and who you want to be reaching with this. Sit in this other voice. But I've struggled with not being taken seriously as a Black woman. People not, like, thinking that I was a credible source. So I write in a way that I want people to know that I'm very educated, that I know what I'm talking about, that I've studied this for many years. And so I actually have to because my I won't say my nurturistic tendency is to write more creatively. I fight against that tension all the time. And so I just want to say that like, I definitely understand that. And even though, like, being very creative comes first nature to me, there is still an audience on the other side who's like, I don't care to read all of that extra. That seems like really fluff. Like, just give me the facts of a particular thing. So I think that can be very challenging. I just want you to know that you are not alone in that. But I think when I think about my dissertation and the direction that I have chosen to go, it's really thinking about, okay, I do want people to read me in this work. Part of me co-founding the Black Researchers Collective is really around thinking about how can we leverage research in a way that's decolonizing and harm reductive, in a way that's helpful and fruitful to Black communities, that's non-exploitative. And so I don't want to take some of those same tools that I learned and perpetuate or exacerbate the issues that are happening in my communities. How do I take those, transform them, remix them, and allow space for other people to think about data differently, to think about doing research differently, to think about how their voice and their narratives is a form of data, and how they can use it as a contribution and an asset to show up and build capacity for themselves and make decisions about their community, so other people, they don't have to rely on other people to do that. So I think when I think about my work, that's the thread I think through, the goal that goes back to the organization on the paper. But in real life, if the goal is to change, then I have to change the way in which I show up, in my writing. So I just wanted to say that, because I think it really connects to how I show up in my writing as well.
Okay, in light of just time and students, if you see some folks leaving, some students will have to go to class at 1 o'clock. But we're gonna stay on for those others that don't. I want to take a question that we have in the chat that's from a student. So, and anyone can jump in and answer this. Upon graduating law school, first-year associates, first-year law clerks are expected to meet the demands of their firms or chambers if they're clerking for a judge. May you share some ways that you were able to tap into your creative side, or did you connect with other writers and collaborators on projects? So Michael or Hugh, that seems like something that you might, and Jeanette as well, that transition into practice and what it seems like that tension that we're all talking about between being creative and being consistent in what you need to incorporate as a lawyer or thinker in that manner. So what are your thoughts on that? Let's start with Michael.
Yeah, sure. And first thing I'll say too, we were on this panel viewing. I only see like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 of us. I thought it was just 8 of us talking here until I realized participants 31. So I was like, where is everyone at? And then I looked down and I'm like, oh, she's talked to all these other folks I can't see on my own screen. So good seeing everyone that I can't see. Didn't know you guys were there. So I would say for me, yeah, it's a transition, right? First, it was in law school because I was kind of like writing poetry, writing short stories. I get to law school and you've got like IRAC or whatever they call it now, CRUPAC, whatever the heck it is now. And so it's kind of like, oh, okay, how do I fit within the confines of this? And then once I got to practicing law, there's parts of me that were trying to figure out, one, what is my writing style, right? So my writing style as a law student was kind of whatever the professor told me to do, right? So that I could get a good grade in the exam. But when I became a lawyer, it was, what is my natural writing style now that I'm a newbie lawyer at that point in time? But not only that, what is the writing style of the partners in my office? Because those are the people that I'm writing for now, right? I'm not getting grades anymore. They're determining my performance. They're determining my comp. So I had to kind of figure out my writing style, their writing style, and how can I kind of infuse some creativity in that? And so what I would do is, I found my creative part by, the types of arguments that I was making for the briefs or for the motion for summary judgments, looking in, doing legal research to find nuanced arguments that a partner wasn't even thinking about so that I could kind of prove my added value to the case. Outside of that, what I tend to always have done and continue to do is whatever I can't get creatively in the practice of law, I find that creativity outside the practice of law, because I realized early on that I'm not one-dimensional, that I can do more than just one thing. And so as a lawyer, I can be creative in this particular way, strategically, et cetera. But as a published author, I can be creative in this arena. And then once I was a published author, my first book was really about, can I write a book? That's step one. Can I actually pull this thing across the finish line? After I realized I could do that, then I realized, oh, shoot, I can write on other subjects. And that's how I started doing romantic comedy and a religious piece. And then I got a sci-fi piece I want to write down the road. You just have to realize that you're not one-dimensional and that you are very creative. You just have to sit down and give it the time.
Hugh or Jeanette and GLENANCE, any response to that transition?
Yeah, I'll just add to what Michael shared. I had a very non-traditional career after law school, and then I didn't work at a firm or clerk, and started doing consulting work for the company that I'm still working with now. And I was paid per case and handling EEO investigations and writing summations. And so I was motivated to get these cases done because I got paid a significant amount of money per case because she had a caseload that she couldn't manage by herself. So without knowing it, she immediately just took a liking to my writing style. I wasn't trying to model hers. I think that was part of the question with partners, et cetera. But she could see, or she approached me and could see that I was a good, strong writer. And then she kept giving me more casework. So for me, it just happened organically. As Professor Kim shared, coming out of UIC Law, we had to take 4 LS courses. And so I realized from others who are attorneys at other law schools, who went to other law schools, they don't have a similar requirement. So for those of you who are UIC Law students, you're getting a great legal writing education, a great legal education period. And so don't take advantage of that. So I was up against people who, went to Ivy League schools, et cetera. And my writing was just as strong, if not stronger, because of the foundation that I got at UIC Law. So, but again, it's, if you're a good writer, other good writers will notice that and they'll recognize that and keep giving you more work. And they might have you tweak it, especially if you're writing for a partner and it's got to go out under their name. So don't be offended if they tweak things, because it's going out under their blueprint. But as long as you give them a solid foundation, you'll be in good shape.
Hugh?
So all I would add is, when I got to the public defender's office shortly after graduation, I was trained in law school only really in legal analysis. And so, truth be told, I wasn't listening to my clients in terms of their stories and how I might understand and empathize and really look at my work from a client-centered standpoint. I was listening for legally relevant facts. And so that was really my kind of mode of communication, because that's what I had learned in law school from looking at appellate cases with heavily redacted fact patterns that only provided us the facts that were imperative in terms of the rule. And I was missing so much. I thought that's what being a lawyer meant. And I missed so much in terms of thinking, again, from kind of a client-centered counseling standpoint. And that was really to my client's detriment, because in terms of criminal defense work, so much is about the story, whether it's an opening statement in a trial, whether it's a sentencing memorandum to explain the history and characteristics of the client. And so a lot of that really involves creativity, really involves thinking creatively about how to integrate all the facts I'm hearing within a legal framework, rather than just kind of listening and saying, okay, stop right there. This fact seems legally relevant, without really understanding how much I was missing in terms of what it means to represent a client. And so I would encourage, when you're going into practice, not to lose that piece, that it is, legal analysis is certainly imperative, but think creatively, even if that's not creative writing, about how best to represent your client, and think of it from a narrative standpoint and not necessarily from a legal or analytical one. So that would be the only thing I would add.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we do a couple of things. All of you all have at some point talked about some things that you're working on, some projects you're working on. If there are upcoming events that you also want to tell us about, please take an opportunity to do that right now. And we're also going to drop in the chat your books. So they're available. I Love Semicolon, a bookstore that is Black and woman owned. So some of the books are there, as well as on Amazon. So we're going to drop those in the chat. But tell us about some things that you're working on that we should be looking out for, as well as any upcoming events. And we'll start with Jeanette on that.
Hi, thanks for the plug. So I'm currently penning the 7th and final book in my Black Diamond Girls series. There's 6 books currently published. I saw the website is in the chat, blackdiamondseries.com. So my goal was to have it completed this summer, but then life happened and I did not get that finished. So hopefully 2022, that'll be available. So thank you.
GLENANCE?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think on the writing side, I am a screenwriter for a TV show that's coming out called Living City Chicago. So that should be premiering sometime this, fall or winter. And it's really about how water and our kind of urban ecology supports city living and city lifestyle. So very much a sci-fi or like a new school Bill Nye, I suppose, hosted by an incredible Black woman who's an urban ecologist and environmentalist. So please be on the lookout for that. And I have a short film that I, produced that's going to be coming out called Bermuda in the spring. But on the event side of the house, the Black Researchers Collective, we are training and equipping training and equipping communities with research tools so that they can be more civically engaged and policy informed. And so if you know folks in the community of Bronzeville, or you're working with clients who live or work in Bronzeville, we would like to be offering some training sessions around how they can use research tools to build capacity for their communities. And we're paying folks to do that. And so I'm happy to drop the link to that if you'd like to share that information.
Sure. Are you able to drop it in the chat, or you can?
I will do that right now.
Okay, awesome. All right, Michael.
Yeah, thank you for the shout out. As I mentioned earlier, Valentine's Day of next year, so 2022, we'll be dropping a romantic comedy. I'm not at liberty to release the title at this point, but it will be coming out, and I'll make sure you guys are aware of what it is and what it's called and what it's about. And then in April of next year, I'll be releasing a religious piece as well. So it'll be a double drop publishing year for me. And thankfully, we're currently in talks with movie deals for both of them. So hopefully those turn out to be really good.
All right. Well, good luck on that.
Thank
so Hugh, tell us, you've been writing over the summer and publishing, and although your mom might be the only person that's reading it, tell us a little bit about what you've been writing about and where we can find it.
So I will say that my next project is going to be creating a PowerPoint slide with all of the great points that have been raised by the panelists. And I mean that deeply. I mean, when I'm looking at the notes I'm taking, all of you have said things that I have tried to convey in my class: brevity, outlining, goal setting, knowing your audience. How about having fun? Is that possible in legal writing? I mean, I think so. So that's so important. And then showing up. And as I talk to my students, they are the change agents in terms of their work as they come out of law school. So this is all going on a slide that I am going to broadcast when I get into the classroom next Tuesday, and so that's really meaningful to me. So my projects are sort of balanced between pro se client representation. So I'm working with some third years to put together a petition involving a juvenile life without parole case, and a lot of that involves narrative, and I'm really fortunate to be working with some phenomenal clinical students and my 1L students on that project. So that project, that brief will be dropping around Thanksgiving, and we're looking forward to that. Yeah, otherwise I'm just continuing along with articles that, again, are areas that I think identify gaps in the legal system that I would like to see changed. And the next one will be out this spring in UCLA Criminal Justice Law Review. So thanks.
GLENANCE,
it looks like you have a question, or you have something to add.
The only thing I just want to say is like really kind of challenge yourselves to do something different that you haven't done before. I think that's the biggest thing, the thing that I'm taking away from all the panelists. We've all challenged ourselves in these different ways to write and think differently. I think about like one of the biggest challenges that was really exciting for me growing up was Book It, like the Pizza Hut book club, where that really, I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to read all of these books so I can get this tiny little pan pizza. And although we don't have that right now, as an adult, that incentive, challenge yourself, give yourself some incentive. What's that carrot that's going to help you get to the next stage? I think that can be very, very helpful and exciting.
Well, on that note, thank you to all of our panelists for helping us celebrate National Day on Writing and elevate the conversation around writing in general and how important it is, how valuable a skill it is, and how it is universal in so many ways across industries and areas. We want to thank all of our panelists so much. You guys have been amazing. This has been such a rich conversation. There's Hugh has notes that he's going to put into a PowerPoint. I have a lot of thoughts that are percolating. I'm thinking about opportunities to cross collaborate as well. So thank you all for joining us for this conversation today. Thank you to all of the attendees for being here and being a part of this conversation. We hope to see you back here next year. This is an annual event, and we're hoping to do it bigger and bigger every year. But I want to thank everyone. And that concludes our program. We are going to share our information. So if there's any feedback for the Writing Resource Center around this panel or any questions about the work that we do, you'll see that on your screen now. But thank you, thank you, thank you. And we will see you back here again next year.